Hey, what's up? My name is Gabby. Welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to be doing another thriller recommendations video. I believe this is going to be the 7th round of me doing these thriller recommendation style videos. If you're new to my channel, I try to do thriller recommendation videos like every 6 months or so, and this will be the 7th video of me recommending thrillers. So all the previous ones that I've done will be linked down below. I've pretty much been doing these since the start of my channel for the most part, so there's quite a bit of thrillers that I have recommended over the years, but these are going to be catching you up on my thrillers that I would recommend to you that I've read since about the month of April when I last filmed one of these videos. Before we do jump into the recommendations though, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for creative and curious people. Explore new skills, deepen existing passions, and get lost in creativity. Skillshare offers membership with meaning. With so much to explore, real projects to create, and the support of fellow creatives, Skillshare empowers you to accomplish real growth. It's curated specifically for learning, meaning that there are no ads, and they're always launching new premium classes, so you can stay focused and follow wherever your creativity takes you. I recently just started taking this class called Storytelling 101 Character, Conflict, Context, and Craft by Daniel Jose Older. I know that I often highlight a lot of Skillshare's writing classes, but I do it because they're so much fun. And the Skillshare writing classes just always really inspire me to want to start writing again. And this one in particular is really great because he starts it off with a writing assignment to just get you inspired right at the beginning. And then he talks about how you can go on to develop your characters and plot. And it's just a really interesting class. But if that doesn't interest you, they do offer classes in many different creative topics like photography, illustration, design, marketing, the list goes on. And it's less than $10 a month with an annual subscription. The first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get a free trial of Skillshare Premium membership, so you can explore your creativity. And thank you so much to Skillshare for supporting my channel and for supporting the booktube community. Alright, so let's just go ahead and jump into the thriller recommendations. The very first one I have to recommend to you is Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. But I know you're probably thinking this one maybe leans a little bit closer to horror than thriller. And you know, you're probably right. This one definitely can categorize as either thriller or horror, I think. But I do think this one does lean a little bit more towards a thriller for me. This one follows this girl named Maggie, and when she was a little girl, her dad wrote this book called House of Horrors about the house that they grew up in that was supposedly haunted. And he wrote this whole story about how their house was haunted, and now Maggie is going back to that house as an adult because her father has passed away, and she doesn't really believe that anything actually happened there when she was a little girl. But in this book, we follow Maggie as she's going back to the house, and then in alternate chapters, we get the dad's actual book, House of Horrors, in between. So we kind of get to see what he wrote about and then what she's experiencing when she actually goes back to this house, and she starts to question whether or not that stuff actually happened or not. And I just thought this book was so much fun. It's one of my favorites of the year for sure. Riley Sager can do no wrong. He's definitely my favorite thriller author. And yeah, this book definitely gets very horror vibes at times because you don't know if something's paranormal or if it's a lie, and it's scary and weird. And I just had the most fun reading this book. I actually did an entire reading vlog just for this book, so if you missed that, I'll link it down below. The next one I wanted to recommend to you is Playing Nice by J.P. Delaney. This is another one of my favorite thrillers that I've read pretty recently because this one involves this couple who is just going about their lives with their 2-year-old son, and then this other couple knocks on their door one day and they say, hey, oops, we accidentally swapped kids at birth. And they show them photos of their child that looks very much like the dad, and they get the DNA test done, and it's confirmed that they accidentally swapped kids at birth. And then this is a story about them trying to figure out what they should do, because do you swap the kids back so that you have your biological child, or do you keep this child that you've grown this bond with over the last 2 years? And this story was just so intense. I just think the concept is so fascinating for a thriller book, and I just thought it was so freaking good. The plot twists in this book were like, what the heck? And I thought the ending was perfect, and I thought everything about this book was just so much fun. And this book is like a really great conversation starter. Like, I kept talking about this book with everyone that I know in real life, with like coworkers and friends, just being like, what would you do if you were in this situation? Because it's just totally mind-boggling and really hard to imagine putting yourself in their shoes. And yeah, I just had a really great time with this one. I highly recommend. Another thriller that I've absolutely loved that I read recently is A Good Marriage by Kimberly McCreight. This one actually surprised the hell out of me because this one is classified as more of like a crime thriller, which typically, usually I wouldn't consider to be my thing, but this book was just so good. And this one is a thriller where we're following this girl Lizzie, who is a lawyer, and her friend Zach calls her up, who she went to law school with, and he's like, hey, I'm getting accused of murdering my wife, can you represent me in my case? And then while that's happening, in alternate chapters, we're getting Amanda's point of view, who was Zach's wife 6 days before she died. And so I feel like the balance of having Amanda's point of view and Lizzie's point of view going back and forth made it a lot easier to read than other crime thrillers that I've tried to read. So I think that's part of the reason why I enjoyed this so much. But oh my gosh, this book was just so good. I thought the courtroom scenes were done really well with like Lizzie in the court with Zach. And then I also thought Amanda's chapters were so interesting. I said this before in another video, but Amanda's chapters reminded me so much of Big Little Lies because of the things that happen in her chapters, and it just felt very like small town suburban moms of all these kindergartners, and they're doing like weird mischievous things. Like, I don't know, it reminded me so much of Big Little Lies. And I just love this book so much. It surprised me so much how much I love this. Another thriller that I'd highly recommend is What Lies Between Us by John Marrs. I freaking love John Marrs so freaking much. He's so awesome. And all you know going into this book is that it follows these two women, Maggie and Nina, and they have dinner together every other night. And then when they're finished, Nina helps Maggie back to her room in the attic where she's keeping her there, and Maggie can't leave, and Nina's gonna make sure she's paying for what she's done because she can never forgive her for what she's done. And that's pretty much all you know going into this book. Holy crap, this book was so freaking thrilling. Like, there was a plot twist at the end of almost every single chapter. Like, John Marrs knows how to write that makes you, like, his writing is just like, it hooks you immediately. It's a wild ride. Like, there are so many plot twists in this book that my brain was just like spinning in circles, and all the orange tabs that I put in here were all the like shocking moments, and there's just so many. Like, I could not have predicted where this was going even if I tried. The next thriller I wanted to recommend to you is The Shadows by Alex North. I was really surprised by how much I enjoyed this one just because I wasn't a huge fan of The Whisper Man. I actually DNF'd The Whisper Man, which is the first book by this author. But this one was like right up my alley with things that I really love in thrillers, because this one follows this guy who was involved with some weird shit in this small town when he was a teenager. He was really close friends with these other three boys, and they did some weird things in the woods, like lucid dreaming and a bunch of weird things like that. And now this story takes place like 20 or 30 years later when he's coming back to that small town and trying to figure out what really happened when he was a teenager. And this book has totally like Slender Man vibes. It's very spooky and very like something creepy's going on in the woods kind of vibes, which I just loved about this. But also I just love that trope of like people coming back to the small town they grew up in like years and years later to try and figure out the truth. Like, that's one of my favorite tropes in a thriller, so this one definitely had me hooked for that alone. I will say the ending did kind of like fall apart a little bit for me, so I ended up only giving this one 4 stars. But despite the ending that was just okay, I still think this book is a really fun time, and I think it's perfect for the month of October. Alright, the next one I have is Invisible Girl by Lisa Jewell, which this one goes on sale October 13th, and this is Lisa Jewell's latest thriller. And this story kicks off with this teenage girl going missing, and you're trying to figure out what happened to her. And this one kind of almost reads kind of similar to Watching You by Lisa Jewell, in the sense that we're kind of following multiple characters in this small town, in this neighborhood. And after this young girl goes missing, we're also following one of her neighbors who is like her therapist, and then we're also following this other dude neighbor who is kind of this creepy ass teacher. And I just thought this book was so great. It was so much fun, and I thought this one was so much better than Watching You. And this was definitely one of my favorite thrillers that I've read so far this year. It was so great. Another thriller that I would highly recommend is The Night Swim by Megan Golden. This one definitely also has those small town vibes for sure. So in this book, we're following this girl who runs this podcast that's like a very successful true crime podcast. And she decides for her 3rd season of the podcast that she's going to cover this active rape trial that's going on in this really small town where this guy is getting accused of raping this girl. And then in alternate chapters, we're following this girl who her older sister drowned when she was older, but there was something suspicious about her death, and she never really found out what happened to her sister. So she's writing letters to the girl who runs the podcast, and she's asking her to cover her sister's case in her podcast. And this book was freaking so great. I will warn you that this book is pretty dark, and because it is covering something like rape, it can be very dark and hard to read at times and very triggering if those kinds of things trigger you. So I would just warn you going into that this book is very dark, but this book is phenomenal. I loved the podcast element to this book, and I loved the small town vibe, and I think the discussion in this book was also so important about like how rape trials go. Not only are the victims harassed when they're raped, but they're harassed again by the court system and by the jury and by everyone judging them. Just a very, very powerful story happening in this book, and I don't know, I loved it so much. I thought the court scenes were done so well in this book, and usually like court scenes just aren't something I'm super interested in, but in this book they were so fascinating. All right, the next one that I have is The Nothing Man. And this is one that I just read super recently that I really enjoyed. This one almost reads like it's true crime because it just feels so real and like true crime. But this one, we're following this woman who, when she was a little girl, she survived the Nothing Man, who was the serial killer who came into her house and murdered her sister and her parents. And she was hiding in the bathroom and she somehow survived the night. So now she's an adult, it's been like 20 years, and she's writing this book called The Nothing Man, talking about her experience of surviving the Nothing Man. And then what's really cool is that in this book, we're reading her book, The Nothing Man, but then in alternate chapters, we're following the point of view of the Nothing Man, who is this man named Jim, and he's reading her book and reading about her experiences, and you get to like hear his thoughts. This book was just a wild time. I thought it was such an interesting concept to read about something that felt so true crime to me, and then getting the serial killer's point of view almost. It was just very fascinating. This book is really slow, I feel like, for the first half of it or so, but then oh my gosh, once it gets going, the ending just picks up and it's so freaking intense. And by the end of this book, I just loved it so much. Like, I thought it was so well done and so cool. The next one I wanted to recommend is His and Hers by Alice Feeney. And Alice Feeney is such a hit or miss author for me, but this one is definitely my favorite book that I've read from Alice Feeney so far. So in this book, we're following these two characters, Anna and Jack. And Anna works in the news industry and Jack is a detective, and they both have this mysterious past together. When this woman, Rachel, gets murdered, Anna gets the opportunity to cover the story in her hometown, and then Jack starts working on the case as the detective when he realizes he knows who the victim is and that he might become a suspect in his own case. And I listened to the audiobook for this one personally, and I thought the audiobook was really well done because not only do you get Anna and Jack's point of views in this book, but you also get this really creepy third person narrator that is like from the killer's point of view, and it's just super creepy and super well done in the audiobook, so I would definitely recommend it for that reason alone. This book was so full of plot twists, and this book got so much creepier and darker than I was expecting it to, like the mood of this book. And I really enjoyed this one. I was super impressed, and I hope Alice Feeney writes more stuff like this in the future because this one was really good. And then the last two books that I wanted to recommend to you are both books that I personally gave like 3 stars, but I still think that they're worth recommending because they're still pretty interesting thrillers. The first one is The Swap by Robin Harding. I feel like Robin Harding is always usually a 3-star thriller author for me. Like, I don't think I've ever loved any of her books, but I've never like hated any of her books either. But this one in particular really fascinated me because it follows these two couples who decide to swap partners. And that concept alone is like really intriguing to me. But then we also get this teenage girl in this book who's really obsessed kind of with one of the girls that's in one of the couples. And so it's kind of almost like a stalker kind of story, almost, with that girl getting really obsessed with her. And I don't know, just like the character dynamics and relationships in this book was just really fascinating to me. But again, her books are always like about 3 stars for me. Like, I don't really ever love where they go. I feel like they never really go anywhere, but I just think she has really interesting concepts for her thrillers, so I think that alone is worth recommending it for. And then the last one is The Hunting Party by Lucy Foley, which again, this one was just okay for me. I expected more from it, but I still did think it had a few good plot twists in there that I didn't see coming. This one is kind of like a whodunit murder mystery. It's actually very similar to The Guest List, and I would definitely recommend The Guest List over this book. But this one follows these friends who go up to this mountain on New Year's Eve, and then you find out at the beginning of the book that somebody was murdered, but you don't know who and you don't know who did it, and it's kind of like the guest list where you're just trying to figure out the whole book, like who it was that got murdered, and then once you find that out, you're trying to figure out who did it. This book is just a not as good version of the guest list in my opinion, but maybe that's just because I read the guest list first. But it just has a very similar vibe, I guess. So if you've read the guest list and you're just looking for something that's kind of similar to that kind of vibe, I would definitely check out The Hunting Party. It's pretty similar to that. But I do feel like this one just dragged a little bit in some parts. Like it got kind of slow, and I don't know, it wasn't my favorite, but it's still a decent enough thriller. It had some shocking moments in it for me, so yeah. Alright, well those are all the thriller recommendations that I have for you today, and I'm really excited I was finally able to do another installment of this thriller recommendations video because I love making these thriller recommendation videos, and I have so many plans to read so many more thrillers this October, so hopefully I'll have plenty of thriller recommendations the next time I do this video, which if I stick to doing the 6-month thing, then I should be doing another one in April next year, hopefully. That is all for today, so please let me know what are your thoughts on any of these thrillers, if you've read any of these thrillers, and what are some thrillers that you would recommend to me based off of the thrillers that I enjoy. You can probably expect another 3 thrillers, like reading 3 thrillers video from me later this month. I definitely plan on doing one of those this month because I just find them so fun. I kind of want to do them like once a month. So thank you so much for watching as always, and I will see you very soon with a new video. Bye!